Hello and welcome to the Emotional Work Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human condition. Now, we've had a little talk in the past about COVID-19, and we're going to come back to look at that as kind of like a backdrop to the podcast today, because COVID-19 has kind of changed the landscape of work for many people for a long time. Now, there are some settings like construction or hospitality or retail where what we're going to talk about today is maybe less of a priority or less of a change or a shift for them. And so this episode focuses on mainly those workplace settings where people might be doing more sort of knowledge-based work. There's also a personal interest for me because the teams that I lead are spread both within the UK and across mainland Europe. And for many of our clients, we're helping them with shifting processes, ways of working, and developing the capabilities to work and lead in a remote and hybrid way. And that's the focus of the podcast today then, about leadership, but in particular leadership in remote and hybrid teams. My guest today, well, they see it as a leadership superpower to be able to create safe and a trustworthy culture so that people don't have to wear a mask to work. And as you will know, fair listener, I have a deep fascination for this idea of a behavioural mask or face work, as I would have talked about it in the past. So I'm really interested to hear how our guest does this in their work, and it's something that he's done in different geographies as well. So I think that's going to be an interesting aspect that's going to play into the podcast today. So let's get our guest onto the air. So welcome to the podcast, Sumit Gupta. Hi, Sumit.
Hi, Phil.
How are you?
I'm doing quite good. Thank you for having me.
Good. Thank you so much for coming on. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm delighted to have you on as a guest for the podcast today. And as usual, we will begin our podcast with the unexpected yet innocuous question. So my question for you then, Sumit, is what is the best thing that you've done in the rain?
I think the best thing is to just soak the rain in, just get wet and absorb what is there and not try to resist and fight it like with looking for shelter or opening your umbrella. That's the best thing I have done in the rain.
Wonderful. So one of my favorite things to do in the rain, so my family and I have a deep enjoyment for hot tubs. So we've been hiring hot tubs for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And one of my favourite experiences of being in the hot tub is when it was absolutely chucking it down with rain. So was just sat in the hot tub with my body really warm and immersed in bubbles, and then feeling the kind of cold rain hammering down on my head, which was really nice. I think I was the only member of my family in the hot tub at the time, but I very much enjoyed it.
Yes, I have a lot of pleasant memories about the rain because I grew up in Delhi, which is a very hot place to live in. So rain was always associated with pleasure or with like a gift from the skies. And if you are playful, then that's what people do. People just go out there and soak themselves in the rain. To get relief from the sweating and everything which comes with a hot summer. So as a child, I have a lot of wonderful memories of just letting the rain engulf me, letting myself be letting the raindrops penetrate my body, and then just enjoying that moment.
And when I think about the conversation that we had off air before we kind of came together to get the recording today, that metaphor that you're using there of kind of basking in those moments and enjoying the rain in those moments, that sounds a bit like how you approach your work and how you approach leadership as well, or is that an unfair link that I'm making?
No, I think that's very accurate, and I think it's very incidental that we started, and the question which you asked was about rain, because that's how I see learning, and that's how I see leading people, because just like the rain, leading people can be so unpredictable, And what I've found is that the more we try to control things, the more challenging or the more friction it generates, rather than to just be present with what is there in the moment. And different people react to the same thing in different ways. And then how can you let everything which is coming at you, and then how can you soak it all in without getting defensive or without getting into overthinking or planning or strategizing, and then just be there with somebody and then listen to what they're talking about, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And then yes, then you can do everything which you do as a leader later on.
And is there, I'm going to risk stressing the metaphor too far now then. And so would the umbrella, or could the umbrella be a metaphor for the mask that you refer to when you talk about the leadership superpower, making it so that people don't have to wear the mask at work, so they can bask in the rain without needing to put up an umbrella to protect themselves?
I think yes, in a way it could be a metaphor, because then the mask is there to protect you, and if you see the rain as a threat, that's what you will do. You will either look for shelter, or you will open up an umbrella, and then you will like physically try to become small, so that you do not get engulfed in the rain. And that's what people do when they are in an unsafe environment. Their bodies become smaller, like they're trying to fit under a small umbrella, and while there is a lot of emotions or a lot of unsafe rain which is happening all around them.
I like that. That sounds really nice as a metaphor and a description. The way that you talk about it also sounds like it's something that you've experienced as well. So have you had those experiences where you're making yourself smaller and you can see all these threats around you, and you've had to and you've kind of protected yourself along the way?
Yes, unfortunately, I have been on both sides of this situation. Like I have been the person who has to hide away, and I have also, as a leader, I have also been that person who has created that kind of environment for others. So unfortunately, I have learned the hard way, and I think the second part I think is very meaningful for me. That as a leader, consciously you never want to do so. You know that why would you want to create a place where people cannot be open, or where people cannot be productive? But yet that happened because that was something which I was totally blind to.
So I know this is a little off script in terms of what we'd prepared, and also the frame for the podcast. But one of the things that interests me is sharing stories of when we've got it wrong, because I think that's something that is done less often. So often we talk about what needs to be done, or here's an example of when somebody did something really well, and maybe there's less of those explorations of when somebody got it wrong. So that's something you'd be willing, and like I said, I know it's not something that we said we were going to talk about, but is that something we could explore for a short period of time?
Absolutely. I would love that frame, and to add my context to that.
Okay. So do you want to do that then? Do you want to add your context to it? That'd be really useful, I think.
Yeah. I think just the phrase right and wrong, I think it creates so much, or it closes so much space that we don't even realize. Like I have learned from my past experiences when I was unaware of what good leadership is. But if I say that I was wrong, or my company was wrong, or my manager was wrong, that already is putting a frame over whatever happened. And then giving people an environment where they are safe to do what they might consider wrong, or what you might consider wrong, is the foundation of psychological safety. And just not using the words right and wrong sometimes can help, because the moment we use the word that this is wrong, or this is a mistake, or this is a failure, that immediately have people react in a certain way, and that can cause them to close down, like in the metaphor of the rain, that can cause people to open up their umbrellas and not be visible, not be open. So that's the context which I would like to add, like just being very conscious of the frame that we put people in. So yes, we can talk about learnings, we can talk about things which have like quote unquote gone wrong, but at the same time I would like to take a step back and say that there's nothing really wrong. Like it's just the way it is, and there is a lot of factors which contribute to something being the way it is, and by putting a frame or a label of right and wrong, we actually make it more difficult to achieve what we are trying to achieve.
Okay, so I want to explore that some more, and I'm not going to, because I want to keep us on the track we were on before. So we might come back to framing a bit later on. So tell me a bit more about the what happened for you then when those conditions were present in the team that you led, where you felt that you created that, or you felt that environment existed where there wasn't that psychological safety.
Yes, so I came from a very, very technical background, and I was promoted to management because I was good at my usual job of software programming. And that's what happens in the industry most of the time. And nobody told me that leadership or management was a totally different domain or skill than programming or than dealing with computers. And then the importance of empathy, the importance of communication that comes with becoming a manager. So what I did was I tried the same approach which I used personally for myself, for my own work. And I expected this. I started expecting the same from people. I started expecting people to work hard. I expected people to respond to me in a way I like to respond. And being a very analytical person, I was always very, very methodical, very like a step one, step two kind of thinking. And I had no idea that people are different. That everybody is different. There are different personality styles, like introverts, extroverts, and I was very introverted. And that led me to form good relationships with a certain kind of people and not have good relationships with a certain kind of people. And then I shaped my management, I shaped my leadership around that rather than what was actually there, and flexing myself to adjust to what I was seeing. And so I brought out a lot of my own behaviors unconsciously into the team environment, and then that created friction, that created a lack of safety. And then it took me a while to understand what is happening, because suddenly people were talking to me, but they were not telling me what was happening for them, like internally in their emotional frames, or they were talking among themselves, but they were not being open to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, go on.
Yeah, so I think one thing which I learned with that is that everybody is different, and when you deal with people, you're dealing with unpredictability, and that's not wrong. Like, that's just who people are. And then how can you use that, or how can you to take that as what it is, like as the metaphor of rain, and then work from backwards to create the team that you want to create the results that you want to create the performance that you want to create, and to allow people to show up as their best version rather than to show up as how I expect them to be.
And if it's okay for me to ask, and what prompted? So I'm guessing then, because of the way that you frame the story around, you've been on both sides. That I imagine there was a moment of some sort, or there was an experience, or there was something that happened that changed it from those things being out of your awareness to those things then being in your awareness, and you doing something, you taking different approaches. So what was that what was that? What was that shift, or where did that shift occur, or how did that shift happen for you?
Yeah, so it was a series of events. The first was when I started to see that there was something which I was totally missing out on. Like suddenly, people who were good friends to me or who were talking to me, who were open to me, were not talking to me. Right. So I tried to understand what is happening, and then a few people told me that this is happening. And then first of all, the question which I asked, that how did I miss that? Like, and why did you hold it for so long? Why didn't you come to me? Right. So first realization was that I had done something and I had no idea that I had done it, and I had no idea still, even after knowing that how to fix it, or to what to do differently. So that was the first stage, and that led me that led me to a path towards learning about leadership. Because earlier I went into the frame was I know what software development is, and then I know what a software development team does, and I will make my team successful. I went in with that frame, like, and if somebody is wrong, or if something is wrong, I know what to fix, and I will give them the solution, or I will fix it myself. So I went in with that frame that I know everything, and I think what those few people who gave me that feedback, that this is what is happening and that is why they are closing up, made me realize that I do not know everything. And then that allowed me to go out and seek or learn about leadership, learn about communication, learn about human behavior, which earlier I was not even doing because I thought I knew everything. So that's one thing. And then what that led to is a couple of leadership training programs. A few of them were recommended by my company. They sent me to a few communication skills workshop, and then I signed up for a couple of programs on my own, independently, outside of work. And then that got me into this journey, which I continue. I would say for the last 10 to 12 years, I have been fascinated. I have still not come to to discovering what goes behind human behavior. I think it's such a rich field of understanding. So for the last 10 to 12 years, through multiple trainings, multiple programs, talking to multiple people, I am constantly learning about what does it mean to be a human being, and why do people behave the way they do. So that's my journey. It started with that revelation that there was something which I do not know. And then the next steps have been basically trying to fill those gaps, or trying to get better at understanding that.
One of the things that I've noticed then, first of all, I will say thank you very much for sharing, Sumit. Thank you for sharing those experiences. That was really, really interesting and useful to hear. And what that's getting me thinking then is that that approach of I learn a way of working, a way of doing things that you had in software development, and then you took that into a new context. So you took that into then leading a software development team, and you look to then apply what you knew already. And what I'm noticing is that happening in the remote and hybrid approach to leading teams then, in that certain for some people then they've learned how to lead a team in a physical way, where everybody's physically there and physically in the environment or the context that they're in. And then with the impact of COVID and the rapid acceleration of shift towards, in some workplaces, not all, more remote and or hybrid teams, the application of approaches and techniques that may have worked in a physical setting are then not working, or certainly not working as well in a hybrid or remote setting. Is that something that you've noticed as well in your work?
Yes. I think you're touching on something important here, that when our context shifts, we do not shift our practices, we do not shift what we do, and then obviously some things will work the way they used to, but some things will stop working just because of the context has shifted, and it has shifted so dramatically with the move to remote and hybrid work. And it's the same kind of situation, right? Because you do not even know that you do not know something. So now then you are not even looking for solutions, and you're not even realizing that you're facing a problem, or there is a breakdown coming ahead, if not immediately.
Mm-hmm. And if I play with that idea, then is there a risk that in the way that I frame this podcast, that that I'm lumping two very different contexts together? Because I've talked about remote and hybrid teams, and then leadership of a hybrid team where you've got some people in the office and some people remote, or some people in the office. Let me just try that again. Where you have some people in a physical location together and some people remote, or you might have some people in a physical location together sometimes and then other times they're remote, as compared with teams that are 100% remote. So if I think about the teams that I lead, we're either all remote or we're all together. We don't have that hybrid approach. So is there a risk that in a way I've conflated those two contexts together, do you think? Should we be separating them out, I suppose?
Yes. I think remote and hybrid, I think are different, and I think hybrid is something which will, I think, still form into something in the next few years. It's still something which is very new, and I think there is still a lot of things which we do not know. And one way to close ourselves to those things is to say that we know, and this is a solution which worked for remote or which worked for in person, and then this is something which we will take directly to the hybrid approach, rather than taking an experimentation lens to things, and see that hybrid is still so new, it's so unknown. Technology is evolving. We have no idea what hybrid will look like 2 years or even 5 years down the line.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think with every question, right, every question or every topic we frame, there is that risk of limiting ourselves by that definition. Even when you say that remote work is hard, or hybrid is hard, I think a better way to frame would be that it is new, or it is different from what we were doing, because seeing everything as a problem, and this is something of a fallacy which I deal with, like being an introverted person and being a software engineer. How to not see everything as a problem to fix, right? So I think hybrid and remote is new, so that's a frame I like to see it, and then because of that frame, it allows me to be open to new possibilities and maybe ideas which are totally against what my current thinking is. I think that's a risk with every question or every topic we frame, and to ask ourselves, that is the question itself or is the topic itself limiting us in our exploration.
Okay, so if I take inspiration from that, then Sumit, so if we've got a listener then who is working in a remote way, and it is new or different for them, what would be 3 things that you would advocate for that leader to maybe think about, or practice or experiment? And I'm now crossing my fingers and hoping that you're happy with those 3 frames that I've put. But let's go with it.
Yes.
So if there was someone listening to this podcast who is doing that, then so they're leading a remote team, what might be 3 things that they might need to think about, practice or experiment?
Yes. So I think the first thing would be exactly what I was just talking about, is to frame it as new, frame it as different, rather than frame it as a problem or as a challenge. And what that allows you to do is to listen to different people differently, because there will be people who would love remote and hybrid. There will be people who will hate remote and hybrid, right? And to allow for that flexibility and to learn from both of them, right? Rather than going into with a frame that this is what you should be doing, or this is what I have seen work in my previous company or in this company, so this is a policy, or this is something which we will do. Like to get very, very practical, like one thing which I have seen people struggle with is the stand-up meeting. Right? It has a place. and that's my current thinking, and I'm open to being proven wrong. But my current thinking is that the stand-up meeting is a very powerful meeting in person, because it creates that physical sense of togetherness. It creates that small space of maybe 10 to 15 minutes, 20 minutes, where people get together and connect in a way that they normally don't do. In a remote world, if you take the same metaphor for the like doing it on a screen, basically, what we are doing in the remote world is we are talking to screens. And if we take the same metaphor and say that we'll still do a stand-up meeting, and we still talk about the same thing, but we will do 5 people, 6 people, and you will have 5 different windows on your screen. It's a totally different experience. The stand-up meeting is not just about what we say, what we communicate, but also about that space which we create by standing up, getting together in a huddle, which is very different in the remote world. Right. So I think that's where I have seen some companies adapt. Like they have almost limited, like I have almost removed any kind of information sharing to asynchronous channels. And I think when stand-ups first evolved, we did not have the kind of communication tools that we have today. Like tools like Slack or instant messaging, or even like Zoom, or using audio to communicate. So I think what some people I have seen doing it well is to use a meeting for personal connection, use a meeting for that kind of information or bonding, but take away all the information sharing, unless it requires a conversation, to asynchronous channels. Right? And then stand-up meeting can basically become a place where you do it not every day, maybe a few times, and then everybody gets to choose according to their flexibility. And then you can still have all the information sharing. You can still talk about what is working, what is not working, what is blocking me, what have I done, who am I waiting for. You can still talk about all of it in a dedicated, let's say in a dedicated channel on Slack for stand-up meetings, right? And then you can actually do it multiple times a day, right? You do not have to state your blocker in a stand-up meeting. You can actually do it whenever it is a blocker for you, if you have that channel, and then use the meeting space, which is virtual, wisely, because we now know that it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of attention to stare at a screen all day. Seeing people on a screen is not the same as seeing people in person, and then we need to be open to adapt to that. So that's one example of what I was just sharing. Does that make sense, or do you want me to continue with the 2 more things which you suggested?
So absolutely, it makes sense, and I'm a big fan of being clear about the purpose and the outcome of an interaction. So if we're bringing some people together, why are we doing it? What's the purpose? And then what's the outcome? So if and then we can then decide, so what's the best methodology to deliver that purpose and outcome? So if the purpose is for a social connection, a sense of togetherness, people feeling as though that they're seen and heard by others, then we can say, okay, well, if that's the purpose then, and the outcome is everyone leaves with a sense of, I feel connected with other people, it's been great to catch up with so-and-so, then we can just then decide the methodology that we think or we believe will work, and then we can experiment with it and adapt and change if we need to. And I'm a big fan of that. And so rather than taking the practice, with the example you brilliantly use of a stand-up and saying, right, let's now take a stand-up and do it virtually or do it remotely, is say, well, what was the point of the stand-up then? What was its purpose? What was its outcome? And then what's an effective way to deliver that purpose and that outcome? So one of my clients that I work with, it's a slightly different context in that it wasn't a stand-up that was in place before, but the catch-up meeting that was in place doesn't happen at a screen. So the catch-up meeting happens over a call while everybody is out walking. Mm-hmm. So we've set up because what we were finding was, what we wanted was people to feel like they had some space and time where they didn't have to talk about work, where they could clear their head, where they could talk about a number of different things that wasn't necessarily hanging it off the different projects that they would work on. And historically, that was done in a physical setting. So they would go to a physical place, they would have nice tea and nice coffee, and they would sit around together and talk and be together as a collective. And what they found was that brought forward information about what might be going on for them personally, how they're feeling, what they're thinking, some of the issues or difficulties they might be having on different projects or pieces of work. But it was done in a very unstructured way. And then when they tried to move that onto Teams, it felt really clunky. So instead, we worked about what was the purpose, what was the outcome, and going out for a walk and everybody being on the phone instead. So actually being out, moving, and in an outdoor environment worked better to deliver the purpose and the outcomes that they wanted than getting everybody sat down in front of a screen. And partly that was inspired by what they used to do is get up physically and move away from their desks and be in a space together. And I was like, well, you can't do that because COVID. So what can we do instead that gets you physically up and moving away from your desk and still being in a space together? So that's where we went with a conference call type approach, but with cameras off and out and about and outside. Now, it gets tricky when the weather's really wet or when the weather's cold, and there's certain times where it gets a bit trickier to do, or if somebody happens to be in a location where it's dead noisy, then. But in the, we're dealing with those by exception rather than letting those exceptions define the operating procedure for that particular type of interaction that they're looking to have.
Yes, exactly. I think that's a wonderful frame that you put in, and the question that, like, why are we doing what we are doing, and then having the flexibility to change that to suit what we like, to suit the purpose, to suit the outcome, rather than the process or the definition of the way things should be or the way things are. And to take it to a granular level, right? We can allow people and we can allow teams that flexibility to make this decision for themselves. So if you're leading 100 people and if you have 10 teams, and if you think something works for you, then you can make it as a suggestion for your 10 teams. But the 10 teams are then free to basically improvise on that, or to do something else with that idea. Right, and in the frame of, or with the perspective of the same purpose that we are trying to achieve. So if the purpose is to share information, what works best for this team versus this team, if the purpose is to build bonding and to have an open conversation, then what might work best for one team might work best for a different team. So right, to take it very granular and ask ourselves, and allowing the people the freedom to ask themselves that does it make sense? Like, I know the purpose of my team, I know the purpose of my organization, and I know my role, I know my objective, I know my deliverables. Now, what I am doing on a day-to-day basis, if something does not make sense, either I should be open to talk about it, or I should be able to change. If that's something which I can change, then I should be able to change it directly. But even otherwise, I should be able to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. So should we go on to the other two things that you had on your list?
Yes. So I think the second one is, I think, and I say this because, right, we are moving from remote, we are moving from in person to remote, but we are still dealing with people. Right? And when you're dealing with people, the principles kind of remain the same. And one thing which is I think even more important in the remote work, because we do not see each other physically, is the importance of trusting people first. Right? So not trusting people when they deliver or when they give us a reason to trust, but trusting people first as an act of faith, or as an act of and again it's an act of trusting, right? If you trust somebody, why would you not give them a chance to prove themselves, rather than coming in with suspicion or coming in with skepticism and then shifting your behavior based on what you see? And I say this very in the context of remote work, because we do not have the physical the physical sensations or the physical listening that we could listen to people's bodies, and sometimes even we're only talking on audio calls. So when that is happening, we do not have that, and it's very easy to assume something which might not be the case. Right. So in cases of doubt, or in cases when there is something that, like, is this person really productive? Is this person really working, or are they wasting time? To tilt on the side of trust, like to tilt on the side of trusting people and giving them that space, that if there is something bothering them, first of all, to ask them and have them share that with you. But even otherwise, instead of asking people for proof of why you should trust somebody, and then you show trust, like not by saying I trust you, but by allowing people to make those decisions which we were talking about in the first point. Like if you trust somebody, then you trust their judgment. If you trust somebody, then you trust their opinions. If you trust somebody, then you trust their suggestions. Not to accept all suggestions, but at least to have a conversation, at least to listen to their ideas. Because that's what people want. People do not want leaders to agree to everything which they think or which they have formulated. But what they at least want is to be heard, to be acknowledged that they have this idea, and that builds connectivity, that builds that we are on the same team together. If you listen to somebody, even if the idea is let's use the word totally bullshit, even then if you listen to somebody, even if you make them feel heard, that's good for the team, that's good for your leadership. And that's what means for creating a safe environment. That's what trust means. So that would be the second thing which I would say. It's a easily thrown around word, but it goes very deep in what you can do if you are operating from trust, rather than if you are operating from skepticism or fear.
So I like that one a lot. One of the things that I get very frustrated by is the idea that we want to monitor how people are working or what they're doing remotely. That we want to that we want to put some kind of monitoring process in place around how long they're at their desk, what applications they're using, how long they're using the applications for. That monitoring of remote workers. When I see news stories about it, or the growth in remote monitoring, the way I interpret that is that says an awful lot about the culture within an organization that feels like it needs to have those degrees of monitoring and monitoring and assessment going on. So I need to be clear that we need to make sure we've got the right security protocols in place. We need to make sure that we're not leaving ourselves open to any IT breaches or security breaches or cyber attacks or all those things. At the same time, though, what we don't need to be doing is monitoring how many hours have you spent on Word today, how many hours have you spent on your emails, or all those things, because it for me, to your point, it comes from a place of fear, of I'm scared that people aren't working, rather than coming from a place of trust of I trust that people are doing what they need to do to deliver the outcomes they need to deliver. And then if the outcomes aren't delivered, well, that's a whole other thing then. So if the outcomes aren't being delivered, then there's conversations to be had about why that isn't happening. But monitoring or remote monitoring for me isn't the solution or the way to do that.
Yes, I think like such kind of activities have no place in the 21st century unless it's a compliance issue, or as you said, right, it's required to protect a larger threat. But in terms of leadership, like if I would have my way, like I would not have any kind of tracking or any kind of regular like time logging or anything like that, because that's totally opposite. Because in the end, again, asking the same question, right? Why are we doing what we are doing? The purpose of putting a team together is to have them perform better as a unit. Right? It's not about individuals. If individuals can work, can do everything, there is no need for teams. The only reason we have teams is people to work together as a unit. And if whatever practices I am putting, whatever policies I am putting is going against that, then why am I doing so? So that's a simple frame which I would like to add. And then another context is that we are not doing factory work anymore. We are not working in factories. We are not using our hands. We are using our brain. We are using our creativity. And for that kind of environment, research has proven that trust is the foundation. If you remove trust, creativity and innovation will go down. Brainstorming will just sound like dull ideas coming, because people will not say what they are really thinking. They will say what they feel is safe to say. Right? So any kind of brainstorming, any kind of creative activity, you need that space of openness. You need that space of trust. And you can get compliance, you can get obedience from people by leading from fear, or by putting in a lot of I think I was reading this somewhere earlier today. Henry Ford, I think he used to penalize people if they laughed at work, because laughing takes you away from the assembly line.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so that's like time wasted. But in the work we do today, yes, you can get obedience, you can get people to do what you want to do by having those kind of policies. But at the same time, you will not get creativity, you will not get innovation, you will not get exponential performance. Yes, you can get incremental performance. You can have people change by fear, but at the same time, they will not be happy, and they will be looking for a job behind your back, and you will not even know about it. Another example, I think I was having a coaching call a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the same topic, trust, and we were talking about how this plays out in conversations, and when we make requests for people, right? If I make a request to somebody and they do not feel it safe to say no, what that means is that you cannot trust any yeses which you are getting. Right? So if people do not have the flexibility to share their different opinions, to say no to what you are requesting them to do, then every yes which you are getting, every commitment which you are getting is kind of bland, because then people are saying yes, but internally they have something else. Like they might have something like this is never going to happen, or I will give my best, but we all know how this is going to turn out. Or let's say I will do it if you ask me to do so, but anyways my heart is not into this, and that will impact the performance. So if you cannot give people the freedom to say no, the risk is that you cannot trust any yes which you're getting, and that's a huge risk if you see it from that frame.
And that would, yeah. So as a leader, then that would worry me.
Yes.
But yeah. So yeah. Okay. All right. So we've had two of the three things then. So the first one you said was use the frame of new or different. So remote working or remote leadership or leading remote teams is new or different. The second one you talked about then is leading with trust. So what would number 3 be?
I think number 3 would be asking questions with curiosity.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's a natural extension of the first two. If you are in a new place and if you are open and trustworthy, that means that you want to know more about the situation, you want to know more about how people are dealing with the situation, and you want to know about what you do not know. And the only way you can do so is by asking questions, right? Not by suggesting, not by sharing your story, not by bringing in things because they have worked for this team or this company, and by asking questions and being open to what is coming up, like Rain again. Because when you ask questions, the challenge is that people might say something which you don't want to hear, or people might give you an opinion or an idea which is opposing your idea, or which is something which you do not see as the right fit, and that stops us many times from asking questions. So asking questions with curiosity. This could be for a very transactional meeting like a work meeting, but this is also very practical for a one-on-one meeting, or for a very intimate meeting where we are not talking about the work issues, we are not talking about a project, but we are talking about how are we working, like what can we change, what can we shift. So that would be my third suggestion.
Okay. All right. So if I look back across those three, then we've got approach it as new or different rather than hard or rather than hard. We've got leading with trust, and then asking questions with curiosity.
Yes, exactly. Like asking open-ended questions, because that's the first step. It forces people to think rather than like coming up with the rote answers. Like if you ask people how are you, like they will tell you they are fine, right? Because it is something which we have practiced so much that comes naturally. But you do, as if you are trustworthy, if you are curious, you will ask another question, right? How are you doing really? Like tell me, what's happening at your end? Are you happy? Are you excited? Are you motivated? Are you bored? Are you looking for a job on the side, or what is happening at your end? And not accepting those rote answers, right? That's also something about trusting people, right? When you hear an answer like that, you know that it is a scripted answer. It is something which we throw out around, but it does not actually answer the question which I am asking. So asking questions also includes the responsibility to create that space so that people can actually answer. So that's I think it's a simple thing to say ask questions, but it's very nuanced when it comes to allowing people or asking questions in a way that people actually feel safe to answer them.
So I think so the intent behind that I absolutely agree with, and having that genuine interest, to quote a friend of mine, Aaron Garner, having a genuine interest in another human being is really important, and it's that genuine interest, not a superficial interest. It's a genuine interest in another person and what they may think, what they may feel, what may be going on for them, and having that genuine interest in them, I think is important. The how are you question, I think it gets a bit of a bad rep, and what I mean by that is, so one of the things that I'm interested in is conversation analysis, so analysing what actually happens in conversation. And that opening ritual is important. It sets a foundation for where the conversation goes, or it can set a foundation. Not I say it sets, because then that implies certainty and universality, and it's not necessarily the case. It often provides a foundation for where conversations go thereafter. So it's one for me that we need to be cautious about dismissing. Or dismissing out of hand, because it still has communicative value. There's the politeness side of things, that we do the polite ritual to open the conversation, because if we open a conversation with how are you really, and with that additional emphasis on really, for example, then it can, depending on, and this is where context is so important, depending on the relationship and who you're with, that if we dismiss the performative, how are you, I'm fine, thanks, how are you, yeah, I'm fine, oh great, wonderful, like we did at the start of this podcast, if we dismiss it out of hand, we risk not giving it the recognition it deserves, both as a ritual to open up a conversation, but it also can be used as a way to signal how somebody's feeling. So the way that somebody responds to the how are you question can provide some signals for you about what might be going on for them as well. So I think it's about having that what I want to say, having that genuine interest and listening, really, really listening to what it is that somebody's saying. And as you said, using that trust to create the environment or create the context where if somebody is feeling something other than I'm fine, where the opportunity is there for them to talk about it. And I think, I can't remember if I shared this story on the podcast before. So one of the teams that I led when I first started being interested in analysing behaviour and non-verbal communication and emotion and facial expressions and things like that, there was a member of my team who was really struggling with something personally. And every day when they'd come in, I'd ask them, how are you? And they say they were fine. And the fine would be accompanied with a look of sadness or distress on their face. It would occasionally come with a change in pitch. So sometimes it'd be fine, sometimes it'd be fine, sometimes it'd be fine, sometimes, so there would be variation. And I would push then. And I say, well, no, come on, tell me, how are you really? And they'd be, no, I'm fine, Phil. And I remember there was one day where I can't remember how many days in a row I must have asked, but whichever way it would appear as though it was too many, because I said, no, come on, no, how are you really? And it was, Phil, I don't want to talk about it. If I wanted to talk about it, I would have answered that question when you asked me yesterday and the day before and the day before that. I don't want to talk about it. I was like, okay. And my intent was one of care and support and understanding and wanting to help and all of those things. But I was kind of forcing my agenda of me wanting to talk about it rather than doing the second bit that you mentioned about leading with trust and trusting that when that person's ready, they'll tell me what's going on for them if I've created the right environment, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful example, right? I think what you're talking is also related to listening. And when you hear people say that they're fine and you see something else in their bodies or in their tone of voice, like that's also something you can listen, and then you can decide what to do next, right? Whether to probe further or whether to back off is something depending on the context, depending on the relationship, depending on the number of times you have already like tried to probe deeper. But at least as a leader, it's a very important signal that there is something missing. And I say this because there are a lot of leaders who are blind to that, who take the fine at face value and they just continue with the rest of the things, right? And they say that, like, my people tell me they are fine. And so that's a risk we take in accepting or listening only to the words and not listening to what is there. Yes, but once you listen, once you take that genuine interest in somebody and you listen that there is a lack of harmony in what I am listening in and what I am sensing, then what do you do about it, right? You can try multiple things, and sometimes you can be the reason, right, why people don't want to share something. And this is something which I have found as a leader, is that to say that did something I do is causing you to not open up about me, all right? Or do you have a fear of how this might reflect to me if you open up about me? And then, because one thing which I've learned from the previous experience, which I started the podcast with, is that there are things which I do not know that I do not know, right? So there still might be things which I have no idea that might be stopping them from opening up to me. And then sometimes just by phrasing it like that, like, feel free to share, and anything which you share does not have to go out of this room, even if it is whatever it is there. So is their lack of trust with me causing them to not open up? And then how can I, in the moment, how can I contextually frame my question? And that could be saying that, exactly, right, this could be something which I have done in the past, or my way of leading in the past is not allowing you to open up, and I want to create a safe space for this one conversation. Whatever you say, if you want to say it, it's restricted to this conversation. It's not going to affect anything which I do later on. And then, yes, obviously people still have the choice to not open up to you, and then you have to respect that choice. You cannot force trust on others. Like trust, I think that there is no equivalence of, there is no parallels between trusting and then having expectations from people, or forcing people to trust you back. So you can trust people, but people will trust you back in their own time, in their own space, depending on their context. So I think that's a wonderful example which you shared.
Thank you. So there's one more thing I want to add, and then I want to ask you a question about myths and misconceptions, and then we'll start to close the podcast off. So the other thing that's come to mind as you were talking there, or as I was listening there, was that often I think it feels like when something's going on for somebody else, that as humans we can think it's about us. So we can think it's about me, or it's about my behaviours or my actions, or the work that I'm setting for my team, or whatever that may be. And one of the things I encourage both my coaching clients and if I'm doing some leadership development work as well is hold on to the hypothesis that it could not be about you, because often it isn't about you. Often it's about something else. So what we see in behaviours or actions of others is to do with things that are happening for them, and because we see them in our interactions with that person, we then think it's about us, and invariably it's not about us. Invariably it's about something else. But I think there's that ego part of us that thinks it's about us, when often it isn't actually about us at all. It's about something else entirely that's going on for them. But we make it mean something bigger because we make it about us, when actually it often is not.
Yes. I think you used a wonderful word there, right? Hypothesis. And I think if people just start to see those ideas or those thoughts which come up because of the ego or because of their obsession with I and me, and this is a human condition, right? This is not about any particular person. This is something which we all
absolutely.
do. To see it as a hypothesis, right? And that's a huge big thing, because what happens is that when we don't see it as a hypothesis, we take action on it. So if I sense that my teammate is not trusting me, then that's a hypothesis rather than an assumption which now I act on, either by talking to them with mistrust myself or asking them for some justification or something. To see our own ideas and thoughts as hypothesis, and then being very conscious about acting towards that, and asking the same question, right? For what purpose, for what outcome am I creating this? Right? So if I get a sense that my boss does not trust me, is this going to help me in that relationship? Unless I go and talk to the person directly, unless I go and make a complaint or go and share the way I am looking at the world, unless I take that action, that hypothesis is not going to help me with forming a good relationship with my boss, or having me perform the way I should be performing in my work, because it's going to linger in my thoughts in the back of my head, and that is going to have an impact. So just that one, I would like one word which you used is so powerful, to see your ideas, to see your thoughts as hypothesis. And then either you can go ahead and gather evidence, gather data for that, gather reasons for that, or you just drop it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we close off the podcast, then I wanted to ask: is there or are there some myths or misconceptions that you would like to address or put to bed about leadership or leading remote and or hybrid teams?
I think one misconception is that this is a problem to solve. Or this is something which needs to be met with a strategy. And I think especially at this time, it needs to be met with openness, and it needs to be met with curiosity, and to be open to trying out different things as hypotheses, as experiments, and then giving people the space to implement what works for them and their teams. So I think that's the one big one. And I think second one is about leadership in general, and not about remote and hybrid teams, is that people are different. And the same person on 2 different days are different people, because they might be facing totally different situation, right? So people are different, and then unpredictability is not a bug. And I used to think like that earlier, that I can't trust people because they are so unpredictable. So unpredictability of people is not a bug, it's actually a feature. And if you can listen to that, if you can tap into that, that can unleash a lot of creativity, that can unleash a lot of innovation by creating an environment of trust, of psychological safety, and then where people do not have to put a mask at work, do not have to show something that they are which they are not, and to be okay with opening up, to be okay with sharing what might be unpopular or unfamiliar in that context, and I think that's the biggest one, I think, which is I'm still discovering, that not to form expectations or not to put people into boxes, and not to restrict them because of either what I have heard from others or what I have seen myself, or even what I heard them speak to me yesterday. And so people are unpredictable, and that means that they can change. That means that things can go from good to bad, but also things can go from bad to good. Performance can change, and giving people that space and that trust comes with acknowledging that idea that people are unpredictable, and that's not a bad thing.
Okay, I like that frame. Unpredictability is a feature, not a bug, and from a software developer as well.
Nice. Yes.
Okay. All right. So if I bring us together and wrap the podcast up, then my kind of questions that I always ask every guest on closing: is there someone that you would recommend that we seek out as a guest to get onto the podcast?
Yes, there are a few leaders I have worked with in the past, whom I would consider exemplify that kind of leadership that I believe. And then there are also a few people I have learned most about, and those people are coaches and trainers in this space. And there are a few names which come to mind, which I can recommend.
Okay, and those would be?
So one of them would be Samir Dua, who is my coach currently, but also he leads the Institute for Generative Leadership, and he has written a couple of books on the topic of leadership. And I have followed him. He's currently living in the UK, and so certainly he is one of those people. And then I think just to add something else, right? So I read this book, Conscious Business, by Fred Kaufman, and it's still there on my desk every day. And I think the first time I read it must have been 6 or 7 years ago. And this book has made such a big impact, and I do not know the author personally, but this book has made such an impact for me, and I take it as a reference manual for leadership. So that if you can get hold of the author, I think he's a wonderful person too, and I think he was like a senior VP in LinkedIn at one point of time.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's also that, and I would recommend that book to anybody.
And the book is called Conscious Business. Did you say?
Yes, it's Conscious Business. Yes.
Well, so we'll put a link to the book in the show notes. Wonderful. That probably takes me on to my second question then, around what resources, so books, videos, talks, would you recommend for people? And we can put links to those in the show notes.
So apart from this book which I mentioned, I think there are a couple of more books which I can recommend around communication and leadership. One of them is Conscious Capitalism by John Mackey. I think this is talking about capitalism and business from a different context. I think the way I see business, I think it's a force for good on our planet, and I have started non-profit organizations as well as for-profit companies in the past. So I say it from that frame, that business is actually a very good or maybe the best tool, business and capitalism, to improve the human condition on our planet. That's one.
Okay.
And then another book I think a series of videos which are there with the Institute for Generative Leadership.
Okay.
So I have been influenced a lot by them, and I think there is I can't remember the name. I think it's called Building Leadership Muscle. So they have a series of videos which is available for anybody who wants to take a dip into leadership, but from a different perspective. I would recommend those to anybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll put links to both of those into the show notes. So if people wanted to get hold of you then, Sumit, what would be a good way for them to get hold of you if they wanted to pick up a conversation with you or find out a little bit more?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So that's the easiest way. I'm also always available on sumit@deployyourself.com by email because I write a lot on my website. I write a lot of articles and a lot of people reply back to me, and I always love having those conversations. So my website deployyourself.com and on LinkedIn, these are the two places where I'm most active.
Wonderful. And we'll put links into both of those things then. So we'll put a link into your website. We'll put your email address in as well, if that's okay.
Sure, that's perfectly okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then we'll put a link into your a link into your LinkedIn, if I can say the word link. And we will
Yes.
we'll make sure people can get to your LinkedIn profile as well.
Yes.
All right. So is there something else then, Sumit? Is there something else that you're thinking, feeling, or want to say before we close off?
I think I loved our conversation, how it flowed, and I think the only thing I would share is that I'm excited actually about helping people be better leaders and seeing leadership as a skill which anybody can learn, rather than as a role or as a title. So I'm actually pretty excited about this whole space and this journey which I started around 12 years ago, and I still continue. And every day I read something or I hear something which piques my curiosity, and then I explore this topic further. So I'm constantly curious and excited, and I'm looking up for what the world will show up, how will work change, how will leadership change in the coming years and the coming decades.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sumit. I've really enjoyed our conversation as well. It's been great to have you on the Emotion at Work podcast, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil, for having me.
You've been listening to the Emotion at Work podcast, and if you got this far, you must be interested in the role that emotions have in the workplace, either within individuals, between people in teams, or in organisations as a whole. So head over to the Emotion at Work Hub, which you can find at community.emotionatwork.co.uk. Thanks for listening.